All right, so last week we started talking about kind of where to look if profits aren't where you want them. And remember, we we said that the important thing isn't necessarily just sales minus expenses, but to really look at where the difference is between year to year. So really identifying kind of this section here. And so what we talked about last week is that I wanted you guys to kind of take a second and think through departmentally, service product wise, and let's run through for goBRANDgo where kind of the delta is in both sales and expense. So we'll just start with that. So what are some service offerings that you guys thought about? Bob.
SEO.
Okay. All right, so for SEO, what would you say from increased revenue, decreased revenue, increased expenses, decreased expenses? What would you think on that?
Well, like ways to do that?
No, what if you had to say, remember last week we talked about you can increase profit by increasing revenue by more than you increase expenses, so maybe it'd be easier if we start with those arrows. And so what were the other ones? There was 5 different sets. What were the sets that you guys?
You can keep revenue the same and decrease expenses.
Okay. What else?
You can lower, or you can kind of decrease revenue, but more so decrease expenses, right?
Yep.
You can
increase revenue and just expenses the same.
Okay.
and one more.
There's one that was like up by a little bit. Yeah, a little bit of revenue increase.
So it would be whatever one.
That you could. What was the other one?
Isn't there one that was like you could increase it by a little bit? But I guess that's the last one.
Oh, increase revenue by a little bit and then expenses stay the same.
Increase revenue, decrease expenses.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. The,
Oh.
What we're really after.
Yeah.
It's the easiest one. Holy crap.
That one. All right, so maybe let's go across the top. What are some our departments, our services? Just name them out.
Content development.
So dev, design. What else?
Multimedia.
Multimedia. What else?
Coaching?
So whiteboard wisdom. Any others?
Consulting.
Okay. So let's just kind of break these down now. Now, which would you guys say, which of these scenarios apply to each of these? Now keep in mind that what we're not talking about is it profitable or not, but let's just say from Q1 versus Q4, what was the change in as far as revenue went up, expenses went up or down? So multimedia.
Probably definitely increased sales there, didn't we?
From Q4 to Q1 was probably similar, probably flat, probably. Yeah, from a gap perspective. And then expense-wise. Went down a little bit? Okay.
There was stuff.
Yeah, because we invested a lot during Q2, Q3, Q4 and building out our systems and trying to figure out the way to do it, the way to structure it. And so overall, now we've got this one. So, in general, it's probably a little bit of a plus on the profit perspective on the change. SEO.
Revenue increase?
Okay. Expenses?
Increased a little bit
Increased a little bit, right. And why?
because it's a total pass-through cost.
It's a cost of goods sold, so as it goes up, it's going to continue to go up. Content.
Revenue increase
do you guys think? I would
The
say
size of that arrow, I would say
it's-
something else.
I would say probably expenses probably outpaced it a little bit because you spent a lot of time working through the new wheel change. So there was a lot of time invested, which are expenses being invested, which are down the road. Development.
Sales definitely increased.
Okay.
I'd say after our initial
It's-
investment, and now that we've got processes, we're decreasing expenses. But that may be,
I think it might be
Being
neck and neck,
overzealous.
cause
Yeah, I feel like the expenses has gone up too, just because the amount of,
Time with
time
people.
and it complicated, like, the more complicated the sites we're making, they're costing more, but they're taking more time to build and QC and stuff.
Yeah, and also you guys started doing your dev days and things like that. So I would say probably revenue has outpaced expenses on that. So we've got here, design.
maybe, go ahead, Bob.
I would say that between the two, I would say sales went up, and I think we've stopped. I mean, other than man hours, I think we've stopped really spending any actual money.
So they stayed probably about the same.
Stayed the same, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What about whiteboard wisdom? A little bit of revenue and a lot of expenses at this point.
Yeah.
So this is plus, this is a minus. Consulting,
Say increase and stay constant for expensive.
I would,
somebody else have a different opinion on it?
well, I would just say because we've expanded the team there, and I'm sure there's been a lot of inside strategy going on around that.
So probably about the same. So then what, and and if we look back here, expenses probably, in general, probably stayed, honestly, like if we've got a person that has stayed on here and we've had more people helping with multimedia, especially with crossover, realistically that's probably increased a little bit because we have more people helping with that. So that's probably here as well. And so what you can see is that there's kind of a combination of minuses and pluses. And then if you look at from a perspective of just the initiatives, so right now that's probably hasn't generated any additional revenue, but it's increased expenses. And then if you look at technology, so we invested in Ignite, we invested in Maven Link Premium, so that probably hasn't shown an increase in revenue yet, but it's an increase in expense. So, we've got a negative there and a negative there. And so what's important is to look at all the different areas here and see, how it shakes out. Because what we want to try to figure out is, are we investing or spending? And what would you guys say is the difference between those two things?
investment is expecting a return on investment, or a return on spending, and spending is not necessarily with any forward thinking or plan.
Right. So what we have to make sure is that making sure that we're reevaluating these things of what's going to make a difference in our sales minus expenses, and make sure that we aren't just spending for the sake of spending. For example, if you look at, for the developers on Friday went on their dev day, and so that was 3 people for half day, so 4 hours. So that's a total of 12 hours. And if we're trying to get $100 on average, $100 billable per hour, so that meeting was a $1,200 expense. So that would have made this arrow on Friday go up by $1,200. Does that make sense? And so when it comes back to, was that an investment or was that just an expense, is when you look at, over time, how is that $1,200 going to generate an ROI? And so if you look at it from a perspective on a bit of a timeline, if you've got the timeline here, out of the gate, so let's just go Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. So let's say that we're trying to get a return on investment by in 1 year. And so the things that they worked on for that half day in Q1, was a $1,200 expense. What now we have to hope for is the content that came out of that meeting maybe gets implemented and allows them to, potentially decrease the amount of time they spend on the website. Or they're going to learn how to do something that we can turn around and sell for a higher revenue amount. And so what we hope is that in Q2, maybe if it's here as at 1,200, so maybe they either lower expenses or increase revenue by 600. So now it's 600. And by Q3, it's another 600. And so now it's break even. And now in Q4, it's plus 600. And then what you hope that it starts building on top of each other. So 1 year and 1 quarter from now it's 1,200. And then 1,800 and then 2,400. And it keeps building on top of each other. And each quarter, a new $1,200 investment that is going to generate $600 per quarter on top of that kind of stacks on top. And so the goal then is to make sure that you're doing these things with a long enough term vision that is going to generate an ROI, but also that it's not going to over-invest and sink too much into it early on. It's kind of like when in this instance, if you think about people who buy solar panels for their house or their business, you spend money up front and it has a break-even time limit, and then over time, then you just start generating that return on investment. And so that's how we have to make sure that we're looking at all of these things to make sure we're investing and not just spending. From the perspective of the initiatives, is that something that, so this quarter, not Whiteboard Wisdom, Sandy, so it's here. So the initiatives where we're going to be generating a new website, we're going to be generating a new onboarding system that's going to help us get our new hires up to speed quickly. That's going to take a little bit of time to recoup that investment because the time that's spent on a new website takes time to generate new leads and to build the credibility and do the things that we want it to do. For onboarding new employees, that's going to take time. We're going to have to run through it 3, 4, or 5 times and increase the efficiency and effectiveness of our onboarding for us to get that ROI. But that's why it's important. The same thing with multimedia, same thing with SEO, all of these things with Whiteboard Wisdom, all these things, we have to make sure that we are investing in what's to come in this perspective. If you look at what's kind of interesting, the ones that are really have the most positives are the ones that we invested most in last year, like early last year. If you look at multimedia, you look at content, you look at Whiteboard Wisdom, consulting, all of those things are more end of last year, early this year. Development, design, SEO, those things were early 2012, even late 2011. And so we're already starting to see the return on investment. So we've already kind of broke through that break-even point, and now we're starting to make profit on that investment. And so what we have to make sure that we're also paying attention to is what's our break-even time on these investments right now, and making sure that over time that we understand this. So the key is to make sure that you don't over-invest. Even though a little bit of a good thing is a good thing, a lot of a good thing may not be a good thing. And so that's what we have to be mindful of, is making sure that we pace ourselves well and don't over-invest. The flip side is you have to make sure that you're investing enough that you're counting on that growth. Because what we're really doing with these things is we're focusing on what goBRANDgo is going to be next year or next quarter, and whatever that break-even might be. And so how to make sure that you're investing in the right things really comes back to the one that we talked about several times ago of the planting the flag. And if these investments are still in alignment with the vision of the company, with the purpose of the company, and with the big goal of the company, then they're good investments. And you just need to make sure that the investments that are being poured back into the company, we always talk about that we're investing in our growth. This is how we invest in our growth. It's not that profits come down at the bottom and we just dump them back in. It's that we're focusing on really making sure that we're investing in the right things that are going to get us moving towards our big goal and towards the purpose and towards our mission and our vision and those things. So as long as we can take an analytical approach to our investments, just like it was a portfolio, then that's how we can make sure that we keep our investment portfolio sound. So does this make sense?
Yeah.
Um,
I have a question. How do you decide the time and money that you, and I would think of it as an investment, that you invest in the actual people and culture? Because really, you're not gonna see an actual, necessarily like monetized return on that, right? I mean,
Right.
You just kind of see more like better productivity, and maybe it shows up in different ways.
It's really you're talking about investing in culture, you know, and that's definitely one that's on here, and that's something I really believe we've now come past our break-even point. You know, probably last year that probably would have been a negative, but I think we've kind of locked and loaded and we've really hit our stride, and that's a really important piece. That's a good point that gets missed a lot in this investment portfolio. That's also something that you do have to invest a lot up front. And it takes a little bit longer to get that break even, but a lot of companies overlook that piece of it and don't invest in their culture and aren't willing to put in that time and willing to put in that expense. So yeah, that's almost kind of over the top of, kind of encompasses all of those. Andrew?
Piggybacking off what Bob said, what would be some metrics that you could measure the qualitative qualities of this portfolio? Like, what would some businesses do if they wanted to measure, like, a return on investment on culture or qualitative type investments?
So there's the ways that we have really started to focus on this, you know, we've done the whole time is in our quarterly surveys that we do before our quarterly retreats, and making sure, watching where the employee satisfaction scores are and all of that. You know, turnover is going to be a big piece of this, is if you are keeping the people you want to keep and the people you want to keep are staying, then that's a good sign that your investment's paying off. And if you're getting people who are, you know, this is kind of a soft number, but are in better alignment with what you are as a company and what your mission, vision, values are. So if there's a way that you can numerically measure fit and alignment, and a lot of times, you know, that's kind of the A, B, C players that you can measure people in that perspective. You know, that'll be another way. You know, with the rest of these, you can look at it from, you know, if you're doing time tracking on, you know, these types of things, and you can look at average tickets, and you can look at you know, the payroll dollars that are being associated to that department and things like that. You're going to get a better feel for, you know, the pluses and minuses based on the profitability of each specific service offering. So this is why it's really important to break it down, because when we look at it this perspective, now we can see why, you know, we're not swimming in profits, but that's a good thing because we're investing the profits that we invested from, you know, in SEO development and design last year. We're now investing those things in new initiatives and new departments and new service offerings that are going to prepare us for, you know, later in 2013 into 2014. These are going to be where, you know, in 2013, 2014, once these all start flipping over to positives, then we're going to be onto something, and it's going to be fun, and we're going to be able to, you know, either reinvest those dollars in new things within the company, or start having, you know, more of those profits that can then come into profit sharing and bonuses and things like that. The key is to make sure that you break it down just from this sales minus expenses equals profit or loss, and figure out where your dollars are going in your portfolio, and figure out if they're still in alignment with your purpose and still in alignment with your goals. And if so, great. You know, and making sure that you can keep the cash flow that's going to be necessary to keep investing in these different sections. So that's the key.